She thought cleaning his office after midnight would be safe. She was wrong. The moment Kang Min-ho walked in and found her on her knees scrubbing blood from his marble floor, something ancient and possessive roared to life inside his chest. She looked up at him with those wide, terrified eyes, and he knew three things instantly. She'd seen too much, she was innocent in ways that made his dark world seem even darker, and he would burn down his entire empire before he let anyone touch her. The girl who'd stumbled into his nightmare had just become his salvation, and he didn't know how to let her go. Welcome, besties. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. The water in Zuri's bucket had turned pink hours ago, but she kept scrubbing anyway because the fear wouldn't let her stop. She'd taken this night shift at the Kong Corporation building 6 months ago when her student visa ran out and the bills started piling up. Nobody asked questions about late-night janitors. Nobody cared if you had papers or a past or a future. You just cleaned what needed cleaning and pretended you didn't see what you saw. But tonight she'd seen everything. The executive suite on the 40th floor where she wasn't supposed to be until 3 in the morning had its doors wide open at midnight. Blood pooled near the massive desk. Broken glass scattered across imported rugs. And the smell of violence hung in the air like expensive cologne gone rotten. Zuri should have turned around and left. Should have called her supervisor and claimed the elevators were broken. Should have done anything except walk into that office and start cleaning like her life depended on erasing every trace of whatever had happened there. She was halfway through scrubbing the marble when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, measured. The kind of footsteps that belonged to men who'd never run from anything in their lives. The door clicked shut behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. Zuri's hands froze on the brush. Her heart stopped beating entirely. And when she finally found the courage to look up, she saw him standing there watching her with eyes so dark they seemed to swallow light. Kang Min-ho looked nothing like the corporate photos displayed in the lobby. Those sanitized images showed a handsome businessman in expensive suits shaking hands with politicians and smiling for cameras. But the man standing in front of her now was something else entirely. Something dangerous wrapped in human skin. His suit was torn at the shoulder. His knuckles were split and bleeding. A cut above his eyebrow dripped blood down the side of his face that he didn't bother to wipe away. And the way he stared at her, like she was a problem he was actively deciding how to solve, made every survival instinct in Zuri's body scream at her to run. But she couldn't run because her legs wouldn't work, and because running from predators only made them chase you, and because she'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the only way to survive was to make yourself small and still and pray they lost interest. So Zuri stayed on her knees with her hands in bloody water, and her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, and she waited to see if she would die tonight. Min-ho watched the girl tremble, and something in his chest twisted painfully. She was beautiful in a way that didn't belong in his world. Soft curves in worn clothes. Natural hair pulled back in a practical bun. Skin that glowed like polished mahogany even in the harsh office lighting. And eyes, God. Her eyes were the kind of brown that made you think of warmth and safety and everything good that men like him didn't deserve. She thought he was going to kill her. He could see it in the way her breathing had gone shallow and fast, in the white-knuckle grip she had on that scrub brush, in the slight tremor running through her shoulders. She thought she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have, and now she was going to pay for it with her life. Min-ho should let her think that. Should use her fear to ensure her silence. Should do what his father had taught him to do with loose ends and witnesses and people who saw too much. But he couldn't because she looked at him like he was a monster, and something about that look made him want to prove he could be something else. Something better. At least for her. Stand up, Min-ho said in English because he'd heard her humming earlier to American music, and because he wanted her to understand every word he said. Zuri stood on shaking legs, the scrub brush falling from her hands and splashing back into the bucket. She was tall for a woman, maybe 5'8", but Min-ho still had at least 5 inches on her. He could see the moment she registered just how much bigger he was, how easily he could overpower her if he wanted to. "What's your name?" Minho asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. "Zuri," she whispered, her accent marking her as East African, probably Kenyan or Tanzanian based on the particular melody of her speech. "Zuri," Minho repeated, tasting her name on his tongue and finding he liked the way it felt there. "You're not supposed to be on this floor until 3 in the morning." "I know. Sorry." The supervisor said there was a spill that needed immediate attention. "I didn't know. I didn't see anything. I just cleaned and I'll forget everything and I promise I won't tell anyone about." "Stop," Minho interrupted because her panic was making his chest ache in ways he didn't understand. "You're not in trouble." Zuri blinked at him like he'd just spoken in a language she didn't know. "I'm not." "No," Minho said, and he watched her shoulders drop slightly with relief that made him feel something uncomfortably close to protective. "But I need to know if you told anyone you were coming up here early." "No one. The supervisor just sent a text saying to come immediately because there was an emergency spill. I came straight here." Minho pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to his head of security. The supervisor would be dealt with. The cameras would be wiped. And the men who tried to kill him in his own office tonight would wake up tomorrow missing fingers as a reminder that attacking a Kong came with permanent consequences. But first he needed to deal with the girl who'd stumbled into his world with innocent eyes and a work ethic that had her scrubbing blood at midnight without asking questions. "You're going to forget everything you saw here tonight," Minho said, stepping closer to her and watching her eyes go wide. "The blood, the broken glass, me. All of it disappears from your memory. Do you understand?" Zuri nodded so fast he thought her neck might snap. "Good. And you're going to take the rest of the week off with full pay while my people clean this office properly. When you come back, you'll be working different floors. Nowhere near the executive suites. Safer areas." "But I need the money from this week," Zuri protested, and Minho felt that strange twisting sensation in his chest again because even terrified and shaking, she was thinking about survival and bills and practical matters. "You'll be paid for the full week," Minho repeated, pulling out his wallet and extracting several bills that he pressed into her hand before she could protest. "Consider this a bonus for your discretion." Zuri looked down at the money in her hand and her eyes went impossibly wider. "This is too much. This is way too much. I can't accept." "You can and you will," Minho said in a tone that didn't allow argument. "Now go home. Forget this night ever happened." "And Zuri." She looked up at him with those devastating brown eyes and Minho felt something shift inside him like tectonic plates rearranging the landscape of his soul. "Stay safe," he said quietly. "This city isn't kind to women alone at night." Then he stepped aside and let her leave, watching her grab her cleaning supplies and practically run for the elevator. She didn't look back once. She didn't thank him again. She just disappeared into the night like a dream he'd imagined in the aftermath of violence and bloodshed. Minho stood alone in his destroyed office and realized he hadn't asked for her employee number or her schedule or any way to find her again. And the fact that losing track of her made him feel something close to panic told him everything he needed to know about how much trouble he was already in. The next morning, Minho sat in his penthouse overlooking Seoul's skyline and tried to focus on the reports his security team had compiled. The attack last night had been coordinated by the Park family, old rivals who'd been testing his territory's borders for months. They'd sent 6 men into his building with the goal of killing him during his late-night work session. They'd failed. Barely. But they'd gotten closer than anyone had in 5 years. And that meant Minho was either getting sloppy or they were getting smarter. Neither option was acceptable. His phone rang with a call from his head of security. "The supervisor has been handled." He admitted the Parks paid him to send the cleaning girl up early so she'd find your body and call the police before we could clean the scene. They wanted the mess to be public and messy. Minho's hand tightened on his phone until the screen cracked slightly. They'd tried to use Zuri as an unwitting accomplice in his murder. They'd put her in danger without her even knowing it. The thought made rage burn through his veins like acid. The girl, Zuri, find out everything about her. Where she lives, where she's from, why she's working night shifts at a cleaning company. I want a full report by end of day. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Boss, is she a threat? Should we touch her and I'll kill you myself? Minho interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal and cold. She's under my protection now. Make sure everyone knows it. After he hung up, Minho sat in silence and wondered when exactly his life had become complicated by a woman he'd spent 10 minutes with. A woman who'd looked at him like he was dangerous and still managed to make him want to be better. A woman whose name kept replaying in his mind like a song he couldn't forget. By afternoon the report arrived. Minho read it 3 times, each pass making his jaw clench harder. Urimtamwa, 26 years old. From Tanzania originally. Came to South Korea 4 years ago on a student visa to study international business at a mid-tier university. Visa expired 8 months ago when her scholarship funding ran out and she couldn't afford tuition. Been working illegally since then, moving between cash-only jobs that didn't ask questions. Current residence was a tiny room in a boarding house in the poorest part of Gangnam, the kind of place where 3 women shared a bathroom and everyone pretended not to hear each other crying at night. No criminal record. No debt beyond student loans she'd stopped paying. No family in Korea. No close friends that security could identify. She was alone in this country the way shipwreck survivors were alone on deserted islands, clinging to whatever floated and praying for rescue that might never come. Minho closed the file and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The following evening, Zuri returned to her boarding house room after a long shift cleaning offices in a different building to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a key, an address in one of Seoul's most expensive neighborhoods, and a note written in precise handwriting. The apartment is yours for as long as you need it. Rent is paid for the year. No strings attached. You deserve to be safe. K. Zuri stared at the note until her hands started shaking. This had to be from him. From Kang Min-ho. The terrifying man with blood on his knuckles who'd given her too much money and told her to forget everything she'd seen. The man who had no reason to care whether she was safe or not. She should throw the key away. Should ignore this obvious trap. Should know better than to accept gifts from dangerous men who left blood on marble floors. But Zuri was tired. So tired of sharing a bathroom with strangers and eating ramen for dinner and lying awake at night wondering if immigration police would raid the boarding house and send her back to Tanzania where even fewer opportunities waited. She was tired of being afraid all the time, of working 3 jobs and still barely surviving, of being invisible in a city that didn't want her. So she took the key and the address and the hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a trap. Maybe it was exactly what the note said. A gift with no strings attached from a man who decided she deserved safety. The apartment was beautiful in ways that made Zuri want to cry. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. Furniture that looked expensive and comfortable. A bathroom with a deep tub that could fit 2 people. Everything clean and new and hers. There was another note on the kitchen counter. If you need anything, my number is programmed into the phone I left in the bedroom. Use it whenever you want. You're not alone anymore. Zuri found the phone exactly where he'd said. An expensive smartphone that probably cost more than she'd made in 6 months. She held it in her hands and tried to understand why a stranger would do this for her. Why a man who'd probably killed people would care if she had a safe place to sleep. She didn't call him that night. Or the next night. Or the night after that. But she kept the phone charged and close, and sometimes late at night when the apartment felt too quiet, she'd look at his number and wonder what would happen if she pressed call. A week later, Zuri returned to work at the cleaning company only to discover she'd been promoted. No more night shifts. No more dangerous buildings or executive suites or situations that could turn violent without warning. She'd been reassigned to daytime maintenance at a small office building in a safe neighborhood with better pay and reasonable hours. Her supervisor, a different man than before who seemed nervous whenever he spoke to her, handed her the new assignment with shaking hands. These orders came from the top. You're being taken care of. Don't ask questions. Zuri didn't ask questions. She just nodded and accepted the new position and tried not to think too hard about invisible hands rearranging her life for reasons she couldn't understand. 2 weeks after the night she'd met Kong Min-ho, Zuri was grocery shopping when she noticed the men following her. 3 of them, dressed casually but moving with coordination that spoke of training and purpose. They kept their distance but their eyes never left her, and Zuri felt fear spike through her system like ice water. She abandoned her cart and headed for the exit, moving fast but not running because running would confirm she'd noticed them and make whatever was about to happen worse. She made it outside and started toward the busy street where there would be witnesses and safety in numbers. That's when a black car pulled up beside her, and the back door opened to reveal Kong Min-ho sitting there like some dark guardian angel summoned by her fear. "Get in," he said, and it wasn't a request. Zuri got in because the men following her had just turned the corner, and because Min-ho's presence felt safer than whatever those men wanted. The door closed and the car pulled smoothly into traffic, leaving her followers behind on the sidewalk looking frustrated and angry. "Are you hurt?" Min-ho asked, his eyes scanning her face and body like he was checking for injuries. "No, I'm fine." "Who were those men?" "Park family associates. They've been watching you for 3 days trying to figure out why I'm protecting you." Min-ho's jaw clenched. "They think you're important to me and they're right, which makes you a target." "Important to you?" Zuri repeated, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "You don't even know me. I know you work 3 jobs to survive in a country that doesn't want you. I know you scrub blood from floors without asking questions because you need the money that badly. I know you're brave enough to accept help from a stranger even when you're terrified it might be a trap." Min-ho's eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "I know enough. Why are you doing this? The apartment, the job, the protection. What do you want from me?" Min-ho was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I want you to be safe. That's all. No strings, no expectations, no debt you need to repay. Just safety. Nobody does that without wanting something in return." "I do," Min-ho said simply. "Because the world is cruel enough without me adding to it. Because you looked at me that night like I was capable of mercy and I wanted to prove you right. Because—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching like he'd almost said something he couldn't take back. "Because what?" Zuri pushed, her voice softer now. "Because the moment I saw you on your knees in my office, something in me recognized something in you, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since," Min-ho admitted, the words seeming to cost him something. "You're in my head constantly. Your face, your voice, the way you trembled but didn't run. I dream about you. I worry about you. I've reorganized my entire security apparatus around keeping you safe from threats you don't even know exist. So no, Zuri, I don't want anything from you except the knowledge that you're alive and well and not afraid anymore." Zuri stared at him, her mind trying to process what he'd just confessed. This powerful, dangerous man who could have anyone or anything he wanted was telling her that she'd somehow gotten under his skin, that she mattered to him in ways that didn't make logical sense. "I don't understand," Zuri whispered. "Neither do I," Min-ho said with something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so sad. "But here we are anyway." The car pulled up in front of her apartment building and Min-ho's expression shifted to something more serious. "The men following you today won't be a problem anymore. But you need to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't vary your routine without telling me. And keep that phone I gave you charged and close at all times. You're scaring me, Zuri admitted. Good. Fear keeps you alive. But know this. Minho reached out and tucked a curl that had escaped her bun behind her ear. His touch impossibly gentle from a man whose knuckles were scarred from violence. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not the Parks, not my own family, not anyone. You're under my protection now, and that means something in this city. It means you're sacred ground that nobody can touch without declaring war on me. Then he was opening her door and helping her out of the car with a hand on her lower back that felt possessive and protective all at once. He watched her walk into her building and didn't drive away until she disappeared from sight, and Zuri knew without looking back that his eyes had followed her every step. That night, Zuri lay in her comfortable bed in her safe apartment and tried to understand what was happening to her life. A month ago, she'd been invisible and afraid and alone. Now she had a home and a guardian and a dangerous man who dreamed about her and rearranged his empire to keep her safe. She should be more afraid than she was. Should be planning her escape from this situation that could only end badly. Should recognize this for what it obviously was. A powerful man becoming obsessed with something he couldn't have. But Zuri wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because Minho had looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered, like her safety was worth more than territory or pride or whatever criminal codes governed his world. And nobody had ever looked at her like that before. The phone he'd given her rang at midnight. Zuri answered it even though she knew she shouldn't. Are you settling in all right? Minho's voice came through the line, deep and warm in ways that made her stomach flutter. Yes, the apartment is beautiful. Too beautiful for someone like me. Someone like you deserves beautiful things, Minho said firmly. Don't argue with me about your worth, Zuri. You'll lose. She smiled despite herself. You're very sure of yourself. I'm sure of you. There's a difference. Oz, can I ask you something personal? You've already reorganized my entire life. I think personal questions are allowed at this point. She heard him laugh, a sound so rare and genuine that it made her chest ache. Fair point. Why did you come to Korea? What were you studying before the money ran out? Zuri settled deeper into her pillows, surprised that she wanted to tell him. International business with a focus on cross-cultural trade. I wanted to build bridges between African markets and Asian economies. My father died when I was 16 and my mother worked herself to death to send me to university in Tanzania. When I graduated top of my class, I won a scholarship to continue my education here in Seoul. It felt like everything was finally working out. What happened? The scholarship was only guaranteed for 2 years. After that, you had to maintain a certain GPA and prove financial stability. I was maintaining the grades, but I couldn't prove financial stability because I'd been sending every spare one back home to my younger siblings. The program director said I was a liability and cut my funding. My visa expired 6 months later. Why didn't you go home? Because there's nothing to go home to, Zuri said quietly. My mother is dead. My siblings are grown and barely surviving themselves. I'd just be another mouth to feed in a country with no opportunities. At least here I can work, I can send money back. I can survive even if it's hard. You're not just surviving anymore, Minho said softly. Not if I have anything to say about it. Why? Zuri asked the question that had been burning in her chest since the moment he'd pressed money into her hands. Why do you care what happens to me? Minho was quiet for so long that Zuri thought he might not answer. Then, because when I look at you, I see someone fighting against a world that's already decided she doesn't matter. I see strength wrapped in gentleness. I see beauty that doesn't know its own power. I see everything pure that my world tries to destroy. His voice dropped lower. And because when you looked at me that night, you didn't see a monster. You saw a man. And I've been chasing that feeling ever since. Zuri's breath caught in her throat. Minho. Sleep well, Zuri. Dream of safe things. And know that I'm watching over you even when you can't see me. He hung up before she could respond, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the dawning realization that she was falling for a man she barely knew but who somehow already knew her better than anyone else ever had. The next few weeks fell into a strange but comfortable routine. Minho called her every night, sometimes talking for hours about everything and nothing. He asked about her day, her dreams, her thoughts on music and food, and whether she missed home. She asked him about his childhood in Seoul, his complicated relationship with his family's criminal empire, what it felt like to carry so much power and responsibility. They never talked about what they were to each other. Never defined the relationship that was building through midnight conversations and protective gestures. They existed in a space between friendship and something more dangerous, both aware they were falling but neither willing to acknowledge it out loud. Minho showed up at her workplace one afternoon with lunch from an expensive Korean restaurant, ignoring her protests that her co-workers were staring. He sat with her in the break room and taught her how to properly use chopsticks, his hands covering hers with a gentleness that made her forget how to breathe. You're making people talk, Zuri said, very aware of the whispers happening outside the break room. Let them talk. I'm having lunch with someone important to me. That's not a secret I'm interested in keeping. Your world and my world are very different, Minho. Eventually that's going to be a problem. My world bends to accommodate what I want, Minho said, his eyes intense on hers. And I want you safe and happy and in my life. That's not negotiable. Everything is negotiable. Not you. Never you. The way he said it, like she was something sacred and unmovable, made Zuri's chest tight with emotions she didn't know how to name. 3 weeks after their midnight phone conversation started, Minho invited Zuri to dinner at his penthouse. It was the first time she'd see where he lived, the first time they'd be truly alone together, and Zuri spent an hour picking out an outfit that said, I'm not trying too hard but I also care what you think. The penthouse was exactly what she'd expected. All dark colors and expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that looked small from this height. But what surprised her was the hominess of it. Photos on the shelves showing a younger Minho with parents who looked severe. Books in Korean and English scattered on tables. A kitchen that clearly got used regularly rather than just being for show. Minho cooked for her, refusing to let her help as he moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. I don't get to do this often. Let me take care of you tonight. They ate at his dining table with candles and good wine and food that tasted like home even though the flavors were Korean instead of East African. They talked and laughed and it felt so normal, so right, that Zuri forgot for a moment that this man was dangerous and powerful and completely out of her league. After dinner, they moved to the couch with more wine and the city lights creating a backdrop that felt like a movie scene. Minho sat close enough that their thighs touched, close enough that Zuri could smell his cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. Can I ask you something? Zuri said, the wine making her brave. Anything. Why are you still alone? A man like you could have anyone. Why choose someone like me who comes with complications and no connections and an expired visa? Minho turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Because everyone else wanted the power or the money or the status. They looked at me and saw a throne they could climb. But you... He reached out and traced her jawline with fingers that trembled slightly. You looked at me and saw a man. Just a man. Dangerous and flawed and trying to be better than his father was. You weren't impressed by my name or my empire. You were just kind despite being terrified. That's rarer than you know. I'm still terrified, Zuri admitted. Of this, of you, of how much I've started to care. Good, Minho said, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. I'm terrified too. You've destroyed my carefully controlled life, and I can't even be angry about it because every moment with you feels like coming alive after years of just existing. Min-ho. He kissed her. Gentle at first, testing, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she leaned into him instead, the kiss deepened into something that stole her breath and made her forget why this was a bad idea. Min-ho's hands were in her hair, on her waist, pulling her closer like he couldn't stand the space between them. Zuri's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on as the world tilted and reformed around this moment. This kiss that tasted like wine and want and promises neither of them had spoken yet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Min-ho pressed his forehead against hers. Stay tonight. No expectations, no pressure. Just stay because I sleep better knowing you're safe under my roof. Zuri should say no. Should maintain boundaries. Should protect what was left of her heart. Okay, she whispered instead. I'll stay. They moved to his bedroom hand in hand. Min-ho gave her one of his shirts to sleep in and Zuri changed in his bathroom, her hands shaking with nerves and anticipation. When she emerged, Min-ho was already in bed wearing only sleep pants that hung low on his hips and revealed a body that was all lean muscle and old scars. Zuri climbed into bed beside him and he immediately pulled her close, tucking her against his side with her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, fast and strong, matching her own racing pulse. Tell me if I move too fast, Min-ho said quietly. Tell me if I scare you. Tell me anything and I'll listen. You don't scare me, Zuri said truthfully. Not anymore. Now you just make me feel things I didn't think I was allowed to feel. Min-ho's arms tightened around her. You're allowed to feel everything. Every emotion, every desire, every moment of happiness. You're allowed to want things, Zuri. You're allowed to want me. I do want you, she admitted into the darkness. That's what scares me. What followed was soft and intense and more intimate than Zuri had ever experienced. Min-ho worshipped her body with hands that shook with restraint, with kisses that mapped every curve, with whispered words in Korean that she didn't understand but felt in her soul. He was gentle with her inexperience, patient with her nervousness, and when he finally joined them together it felt like something clicking into place that had been waiting her whole life to align. Afterward, they lay tangled together with Min-ho pressing kisses to her temple and Zuri trying not to cry from the overwhelming rightness of it all. Stay with me, Min-ho murmured against her skin. Not just tonight. Every night. Move in here where I can keep you safe and wake up to you every morning and fall asleep knowing you're exactly where you belong. That's crazy. We barely know each other. I know everything that matters. And the rest we'll learn together. He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. I love you, Zuri. I've loved you since the moment you looked at me like I was capable of mercy. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve that faith you had in me. Zuri's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. I didn't want to. I tried not to. But you made it impossible not to fall. Min-ho kissed her again, slow and deep and full of promises. Then fall. I'll catch you every single time. Zuri woke up alone in Min-ho's bed with early morning light streaming through the windows. She could hear him on the phone in another room. His voice sharp and cold in a way it never was with her. Reality crashed back with uncomfortable force. She'd slept with a criminal. She'd fallen in love with a man who killed people. She'd let herself believe in a fantasy that could only end in heartbreak or worse. Zuri got dressed quickly in her clothes from yesterday and tried to slip out without confronting all the complicated emotions churning in her chest. She made it to the front door before Min-ho appeared, ending his phone call abruptly. Where are you going? His voice was careful, controlled, but she could see the fear in his eyes. Home. Back to my apartment. This was a mistake. A mistake, Minho repeated, and something dangerous flashed across his face. Last night was a mistake. We got caught up in the moment. You made me feel special and I let myself forget that our worlds don't mix. That eventually, your family or your enemies or your lifestyle will destroy what we're building. Zuri forced herself to look at him even though it hurt. I can't be your weakness, Minho. And that's all I'll ever be in your world. You're not my weakness, Minho said, closing the distance between them. You're my strength. You're the reason I want to be better than my father was. You're the only good thing in my life, and I'm not letting you walk away because you're scared. I'm not scared. I'm realistic. You're terrified, Minho corrected, cupping her face in his hands. But so am I. Love is terrifying, Zuri. Opening yourself to someone who can destroy you is the bravest thing either of us can do. And I'm asking you to be brave with me. What if it's not enough? What if loving each other isn't enough to overcome everything that's trying to tear us apart? Then we fight harder. We build higher walls. We refuse to let anyone or anything take this from us. Minho's eyes burned with intensity. But we don't run. Not from this. Not from each other. Zuri wanted to believe him. Wanted to think love could conquer all the very real obstacles between them. But fear was a powerful thing and she'd been afraid for so long that safety felt like a trap. I need time, she said quietly. To think. Process. To figure out if I'm brave enough for your world. Minho's jaw clenched but he nodded. Take your time. But know that I'm not giving up on us. I'll fight for you every single day until you believe that we're worth fighting for. He let her leave. Didn't try to stop her or convince her to stay. Just watched her walk out of his penthouse with eyes that promised this wasn't over. Zuri made it back to her apartment and lasted exactly 3 hours before she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Not in sleeping with Minho or falling in love with him, but in running away from the first real happiness she'd found in years. She was reaching for her phone to call him when someone knocked on her door. Hope flared in her chest. Maybe Minho had come after her. But when she opened the door, 3 men she didn't recognize forced their way inside. They were Korean, dressed in suits, moving with the coordinated efficiency of professionals. One of them grabbed Zuri while another swept the apartment checking for witnesses or weapons. The third one made a phone call in rapid Korean that Zuri didn't understand but knew was bad. Kong Minho has made you very valuable, the man holding her said in accented English. The Parks send their regards. They dragged her out of the apartment and into a waiting van. Zuri fought and screamed, but the building was mostly empty during the day and nobody came to help. She was shoved into the back of the van, her hands bound, her mouth gagged, and driven away from safety into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Minho was in a meeting with his security team when the call came through. One of his men monitoring Zuri's apartment complex reported suspicious activity. By the time they pulled up the camera footage, she was already gone. The rage that exploded through Minho's chest was volcanic. He'd known she was in danger. He'd tried to protect her. And she'd run from him straight into the hands of his enemies because she'd been too afraid to accept that they were worth fighting for. Find her, Minho said in a voice so cold his men physically recoiled. Tear this city apart if you have to. Call in every favor. Threaten every source. Put a price on information that's too high to refuse. And find out exactly which Park family members signed off on taking her. Boss, if we go to war over a woman. She's not just a woman, Minho interrupted. His voice dropping to something lethal. She's mine. And anyone who touches what's mine learns very quickly why my family has ruled this city for 3 generations. Now move. His team scattered to follow orders. Minho stood alone in his office and made a vow to himself and to whatever gods might be listening. He would burn down the entire Park family empire to get Zuri back. He would paint the streets red with the blood of everyone who'd even thought about hurting her. And when he found her, not if, when, he would never let her out of his sight again. The Parks had just made the last mistake of their lives. They'd taken something precious from Kong Min-ho. Now he was going to show them exactly what happened to people stupid enough to believe he had limits to his cruelty when it came to protecting what he loved. Zuri woke up in darkness with her head pounding and her hands still bound. The gag had been removed, but her mouth was dry and tasted like chemicals. They drugged her at some point during transport. She could hear voices speaking Korean somewhere nearby, but not close enough to make out words. The room she was in smelled like mold and old concrete. When her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering under a door, she could make out bare walls, a concrete floor, and absolutely no furniture. Basement or warehouse. Somewhere remote enough that screaming wouldn't bring help. Fear threatened to choke her, but Zuri forced it down. Min-ho would come for her. She knew that with a certainty that went beyond logic. He'd said she was under his protection, and he'd meant it. She just had to stay alive long enough for him to find her. The door opened and a man walked in. He was older than Min-ho, maybe mid-40s, with expensive clothes and cold eyes that assessed Zuri like she was merchandise he was evaluating. Awake. Good. He spoke in English. I'm Park Jin-woo. You've become a problem that needs solving. Min-ho will kill you for this, Zuri said, her voice steadier than she felt. Kong Min-ho is going to negotiate for your release. We're going to ask for territory, for payments, for concessions that will weaken his position significantly. And he'll give us everything we ask for because you've made him soft. Park Jin-woo smiled. Love is such an exploitable weakness. He won't negotiate. He will. Or we'll send him pieces of you until he does. Park Jin-woo crouched down to her level. Tell me what makes you so special. You're pretty enough but nothing extraordinary. You have no family, no connections, no education that matters. Why would someone like Kong Min-ho destroy his empire for someone like you? Because he's a better man than you'll ever be, Zuri said, meeting his eyes without flinching. Park Jin-woo backhanded her hard enough that her head snapped to the side and blood filled her mouth. We'll see how long that confidence lasts. You have 48 hours before we start removing fingers. Use that time to pray your lover values you enough to bankrupt himself. Then he was gone, leaving Zuri alone in the dark with her fear and her faith that Min-ho would come. She'd run from him that morning, had doubted them, had let fear make her choices. But she wouldn't make that mistake again. If she survived this, when she survived this, she'd stop running from the only man who'd ever made her feel like home. 36 hours. That's how long it took Min-ho's network to locate Zuri. A warehouse in the industrial district controlled by a Park family subsidiary. She was being held in the basement with 4 guards rotating in 6-hour shifts. Min-ho planned the extraction with military precision. He brought 20 of his best men, enough firepower to level the building if necessary, and a rage so cold and controlled that even his most loyal soldiers looked nervous. They hit the warehouse at 4 in the morning when humans were at their weakest. Min-ho went in first because he needed to be the one to reach Zuri, needed to be the one to show her she was safe now. The guards never saw them coming. Min-ho's team moved through the warehouse like ghosts, eliminating threats with silenced weapons and brutal efficiency. By the time they reached the basement, there was no one left to sound an alarm. Min-ho kicked in the door to find Zuri huddled in a corner, her face bruised, her eyes widening when she recognized him. Min-ho, she breathed, and the relief in her voice nearly broke him. He was across the room in seconds, cutting her bonds, checking her for serious injuries, pulling her against his chest like he could physically shield her from everything that had already happened. I've got you, he murmured into her hair. You're safe now. I'm so sorry I didn't get here sooner. I'm so sorry they hurt you. You came, Zuri said, her hands fisting in his jacket. I knew you would come. Always, Minho promised. I will always come for you. You're mine, Zuri. Mine to protect, mine to love, mine to keep safe from everything including my own world. And anyone who doesn't understand that is going to learn a very permanent lesson. He lifted her into his arms and carried her out of the warehouse. His men had secured a vehicle and they drove through Seoul's pre-dawn streets with Zuri cradled against Minho's chest, her face buried in his neck, his arms wrapped around her like he'd never let go. At his penthouse, Minho carried her straight to his bathroom and started a bath. When Zuri protested that she could do it herself, he just shook his head. Let me take care of you, please. I need to do this. So Zuri let him undress her with gentle hands, let him help her into the warm water, let him wash away the physical evidence of her captivity with a tenderness that made her cry. Minho washed her hair, cleaned her bruises with careful attention, and murmured apologies in Korean that she didn't need translated to understand. After the bath, he bandaged her cuts, gave her his softest shirt to sleep in, and tucked her into his bed like she was something infinitely precious. Don't leave, Zuri said when he started to pull away. I'm just going to make some calls. Don't leave, she repeated. Please. I need you here. Minho climbed into bed beside her and pulled her close. I'm not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever if you'll let me stay. They lay in darkness with their heartbeats synchronizing, with all the words they needed to say hovering between them. I'm sorry I ran, Zuri said quietly. I was scared and I let that fear make me stupid. I could have died today because I wasn't brave enough to believe in us. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have done more to make you feel safe in my world. I should have. Stop, Zuri interrupted, pressing her fingers against his lips. We both made mistakes. But I'm done running, Minho. I'm done letting fear control my choices. I love you and I want to be with you and I don't care how complicated or dangerous or impossible it seems. You're worth fighting for. We're worth fighting for. Minho kissed her fingers, her palm, her wrist. Marry me. Zuri's breath caught. What? Marry me, Minho repeated, his eyes intense on hers. Tomorrow, next week, whenever you're ready. But marry me, Zuri. Be my wife. Let me protect you legally as well as physically. Let me give you my name and my resources and everything I have to give. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that choosing me was the right decision. Minho, we've only known each other for 2 months. And I've loved you for every second of those 2 months. Time is meaningless when you find the person who makes you want to be better. When you find the person who sees your darkness and chooses you anyway. He cupped her face in his hands. Say yes. Please say yes. Zuri looked into his eyes and saw her future written there. Complicated and dangerous and beautiful. Full of love that burned hot enough to forge them both into something stronger than they'd been alone. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Minho kissed her like she'd just given him the world, and maybe she had. Maybe they'd given each other the world. A world where love mattered more than fear, where two people from completely different universes could collide and create something that transcended all the reasons they shouldn't work. The next morning, Minho called a meeting with the Park family leadership. Every major player in their organization showed up because you didn't ignore a summons from Kong Minho, especially not after he decimated their warehouse operation in a single night. They met in a neutral location, a private room in a restaurant that catered to men who conducted business outside the law. Park Jin-woo was there with several of his brothers and cousins, all of them looking like they were trying to decide if they were more angry than afraid. Minho walked in with Zuri at his side, his hand possessive on her waist, making it absolutely clear that she wasn't hidden away or protected from this confrontation. She was his equal, his partner, the reason he declared war. You took something that belongs to me, Minho said without preamble. You hurt her. You thought you could use her as leverage. You were wrong. She's one woman, Park Jin-woo said dismissively. Not worth starting a war over. To you maybe. To me she's everything. Minho's voice was cold and controlled. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to formally apologize to Zuri for her kidnapping and mistreatment. You're going to pay reparations for her medical expenses and trauma. And you're going to sign a treaty that recognizes her as untouchable, off limits to all Park family operations now and forever. And if we refuse, then I burn your empire to the ground, Minho said simply. Every warehouse, every business, every asset you control. I'll dismantle it piece by piece and salt the earth so thoroughly that your family name becomes synonymous with extinction. And I'll make sure you live long enough to watch it all disappear. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Park Jin-woo looked at his brothers, at the cold certainty in Minho's eyes, at Zuri standing there like a queen who'd survived their worst and come out stronger. You'd really destroy everything over a woman. Not a woman, Minho corrected. My woman. My future wife. The mother of my future children. The person who matters more to me than power or territory or the entire criminal empire my family built. So yes, I'd destroy everything. And unlike you, I actually have the resources and the ruthlessness to follow through. Silence fell across the room. Then slowly Park Jin-woo nodded. We agree to your terms. Say it to her, Minho demanded. Apologize to Zuri directly. Park Jin-woo turned to Zuri, his jaw tight with humiliation. I apologize for your kidnapping and any harm that came to you. It won't happen again. Thank you, Zuri said graciously, her voice steady even though Minho could feel her trembling slightly against his side. They signed the treaty that afternoon. By evening, word had spread through Seoul's underground that Zuri was protected by the highest level of criminal accord. Touching her meant death. Threatening her meant war. She was as untouchable as if she'd been born into power rather than stumbling into it through accidental love. 2 weeks later, Minho and Zuri got married in a small private ceremony. Just his close family, an uncle who approved and a few cousins who were more curious than hostile. Zuri wore a simple white dress that Minho had personally selected. They exchanged vows in Korean and English, promising to protect each other, to choose each other, to build a life that honored both their worlds. Minho slipped a ring on her finger and Zuri realized she was crying. Happy tears this time. Tears of relief that she'd found home in the most unexpected place. The reception was held at Minho's penthouse with food from both Korean and East African cuisines. They danced to music that mixed both their cultures. And when Minho pulled her close for their first dance as husband and wife, Zuri felt something settle deep in her chest. I love you, she whispered against his neck. I love you more than I have words for, Minho replied. Thank you for being brave enough to choose me. For seeing past the monster everyone else sees. For making me want to be the man you believe I can be. You were always that man. You just needed someone to remind you. 6 months after their wedding, Zuri stood in Minho's bathroom staring at a positive pregnancy test with shaking hands. They talked about children, about building a family that would be raised with love instead of the cold calculation Minho had experienced. But talking about it and actually creating a new life were two very different things. She was terrified, excited, overwhelmed by the responsibility of bringing a child into a world that was still dangerous despite Minho's protection. But she was also hopeful because she knew Minho would move heaven and earth to keep their child safe. Zuri! Minho's voice came from the bedroom. Are you okay? She walked out holding the test, her eyes meeting his across the room. We're having a baby. Minho's expression transformed from concern to joy so fast it was almost comical. He crossed to her in 3 strides, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We're having a baby," he repeated, pressing kisses to her face, her neck, her hands. "You've given me everything, Zuri. A home, a purpose, and now a future I actually want to see. I love you so much. I love you too. Even when you're being dramatic and spinning me around when I'm trying to not vomit from morning sickness." Minho set her down gently, his hand immediately going to her still flat stomach with wonder written across his face. "I'm going to be a father." "You're going to be an amazing father," Zuri corrected. "Our child is so lucky to have you." They stood there in the morning light with a city of soul spreading out beyond their windows. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from darkness and fear and accidental love. 9 months later, Zuri gave birth to a daughter with Minho's dark eyes and her mother's smile. They named her Grace because she'd been an unexpected blessing in their complicated lives. Minho held his daughter with tears streaming down his face, whispering promises in Korean that he'd protect her forever, that he'd give her the childhood he'd never had, that she'd never doubt she was loved and wanted and precious. Zuri watched her husband cradle their daughter and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This was her family, her home, the life she'd built from nothing in a country that hadn't wanted her. She thought about the night she'd scrubbed blood from a marble floor, terrified and alone. Thought about the moment Minho had walked in and everything changed. Thought about all the fear and danger and impossible odds they'd overcome to get to this moment. And she knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choices all over again. Because sometimes love found you in the darkest places. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the city became your safest haven. And sometimes an accidental encounter changed your entire life in ways you'd never expected but desperately needed. Minho looked up from their daughter to meet Zuri's eyes. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay. For choosing us. For giving me a family I don't deserve but will spend my whole life being worthy of." "You already are worthy," Zuri said softly. "You've always been worthy, Minho. You just needed someone to show you." They sat together in the hospital room with their daughter between them, a family forged from blood and violence and love that refused to be defeated. Outside, Seoul continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the small miracle that had just occurred within its borders. But in this room, in this moment, nothing existed beyond the three of them. Beyond the impossible love story that had started with fear and ended with a family. Beyond the truth that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was open your heart to someone who should terrify you. Because that's where the real magic lived. In the space between fear and trust. In the moment you chose love despite knowing all the ways it could destroy you. In the courage it took to believe that broken people could heal each other. And as Minho kissed his wife and held his daughter, he knew that everything he'd done, every choice that had led him to that warehouse floor where a beautiful woman scrubbed blood without asking questions, had been worth it. She'd saved him in ways she'd never fully understand. And he'd spend the rest of his life proving that love could transform even the darkest soul into something capable of light.